Joining me now on set, NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba. Symone Sanders-Townsend, former senior advisor to Vice President Harris and host of Symone on MSNBC. Matthew Continetti, director of domestic policy studies at the American Enterprise Institute and columnist at Commentary Magazine. Thanks to all of you for being here. So, Monica, I want to start with you and just have you kind of set the scene. You obviously have been working your sources at the White House. We both have covered the White House, and this is so deeply personal for President Biden. But there's a political element to this as well. What are your sources telling you about how they're responding?
Undoubtedly, Kristen, and this is something that really does take an emotional toll on the president, on the first lady, who are really Hunter Biden's fiercest defenders, who will always, it seems, no matter the development, no matter these new charges, come out and say simply, we are proud of our son, we support him, and we really hope he continues on this path to recovery that he has been on, of course, referencing his drug addiction and what we've seen since then. And in this time period, of course, where many of these allegations are rooted, that is what they come back to. At the same time, we have also seen the president in recent months say simply that he believes his son did nothing wrong. And the political reality of squaring that with this blistering indictment that does lay out in lurid detail what Hunter Biden was doing allegedly to avoid paying his taxes, well, that is a different answer that this president will certainly have to speak to. And earlier this week, and this comes, of course, just days before he's facing this potential impeachment inquiry vote, he was asked about these allegations. And what the White House is always pointing to is the fact that they believe there's nothing that links whatever Hunter Biden may have done here with his father as it relates to business dealings. And they continue to point to the lack of that evidence as their defense. But the president weighed in this week and said all of that, any allegation that he was involved, is pure lies. And he said it no less than 3 times.
A defiance, as Monica reports, from President Biden. And Symone, we are talking about the president's son. These are not allegations against the president himself, as Monica has said. Republicans have yet to try to draw that line between Hunter Biden's business dealings and President Biden. And yet, politically speaking, this is unwelcome news for the White House and for Democrats, I would imagine. How much concern is there based on your conversations?
Well, based on my conversations, I think there's concern, as Monica alluded to just how the president and the first lady are feeling. The campaign individuals and the effect on the broader White House apparatus, less so. I think it is very, very, very important to underscore that, like, Hunter Biden may have done some things. There was and I saw Chuck Rosenberg on with you, there was a plea deal back in June that fell apart in court, as we all saw it happen. Everyone was shocked by the plea deal falling apart. And now from that plea deal, now there's new, I guess the investigators read Hunter Biden's book and tried to square the circle. None of that, though, has anything to do with President Biden. And I do think it's important, this defiance from the president. I think it was about time for Joe Biden to get a little indignant and say, this has nothing to do with me. Let's get off of that. Because if they do not do that, if it is not aggressive from the president and the campaign apparatus writ large, there is the potential for the waters to get murky. I harken back to 2020 during that campaign that I advised. Very aggressive about the Hunter Biden, Joe Biden, no linkage. Had to be aggressive, because if not, there's confusion that can seep in. And even you would see the president candidate go to town halls and still have to answer questions.
Well, and it's about those questions that continue to loom. And Matthew, this does come, of course, as Republicans are signaling that they're going to hold this vote on an impeachment inquiry. As we're saying, even some top Republicans are saying there still hasn't been this link established. Some Republicans who I've been talking to, and I even spoke to Governor Ron DeSantis on the record on Meet the Press last Sunday, and he expressed concerns that this is not necessarily what's top of mind for American voters.
Right.
Is there a concern about this backfiring?
I think in some quarters of the Republican Party, there's a concern it may backfire. But I also think it's important to understand that the way in which this story is being treated within the Beltway may be slightly different than the way the story is perceived outside the Beltway. And when you set this in the context of President Biden's approval ratings, which are continuing to fall under 40% now in the averages, when you look at some of the attributes that voters see in President Biden, he is no longer seen as this upright, honest broker or pragmatic deal maker. He is seen as someone who has been ethically compromised, whether it's true or not, by his association with his son's business. So if the House is able to start this inquiry with the vote, I do think it will feed into a larger critique of President Biden that is hurting him in the campaign.
What about that, Symone? Go ahead.
I guess I would say I do think the poll numbers are low. I mean, we all see the polling every week. But even in the NBC News polling, it notes that voters have yet to associate what Hunter Biden has done with Joe Biden. Now, as things go on, that could change. But right now, the voters don't actually see him as ethically compromised on Hunter Biden. I think what does show up in the polling is that voters are not distinguishing between the corruption between Donald Trump and the corruption between Joe Biden. And that, I think, is going to be something that the campaign will need to parse out. Because if people are putting Joe Biden right up there with Donald Trump, honey, it's looking a little murky, Kristen.
Yeah,
looking a little murky.
We have a little bit of sound from Hunter Biden. I want to play a little bit of it and get some reaction on the other side.
I recognize that none of this is necessarily about me. They are trying to, in their most illegitimate way, but rational way, they're trying to destroy a presidency. And so it's not about me. In their most base way, what they're trying to do is they're trying to kill me, knowing that it will be a pain greater than my father could be able to handle.
So this was during an interview with the artist known as Moby. Monica, how does the White House feel about Hunter Biden speaking out? Because isn't there like a faction of not just the White House, the campaign that just wants this to be swept under the rug?
And for so long, Kristen, when we would see these legal developments, there would be questions, there would be debates internally about whether the president should keep his son close, whether he should be attending state dinners, whether he should be visible and public. And there was a time there where they were saying, of course he's going to be close. Of course the president is going to keep him at arm's length because, according to those close to him, he's worried that if he pushes Hunter away, there is a very real risk here of a relapse. And that's something he has privately even told his aides, don't bring up Hunter with me. Don't tell me how to think about dealing with my own son and my family. So there are some who even are very careful about even putting this into the political calculus for him. But you have to imagine that those conversations still go on with probably his inner circle, because these are things that are being examined by a special counsel. And we're talking about Hunter Biden potentially in 2 criminal trials while his father is seeking re-election. These things could be happening on this split screen that we have seen legally and politically.
Yeah, and that split screen is what so many Democrats are so concerned about. Symone, if you were advising Hunter Biden right now politically, I mean, is this smart? Does this help his dad to speak out? I mean, as Monica says, this is so personal.
I think there's 2 questions. Does it help his father, and then does it help him?
That's right.
Right? And I think that it absolutely behooves Hunter Biden for Hunter to go out there and defend himself. Does it help the president for Hunter Biden to do podcast interviews? I don't necessarily think so. But yet again, Hunter Biden is not checking with the campaign apparatus or the White House about what he does and vice versa. There is a real separation. And the advisors to the president, the campaign advisors to the president's re-election campaign, they advise the president. They do not advise Hunter Biden.
Matthew, just finally, I mean, former President Trump, who is an actual candidate, is facing 91 felony charges, 4 different indictments. It's only emboldened him in the primary. If he were to go on and win the nomination, what are the discussions like right now, as we're less than 40 days away from Iowa, about how it might impact him in a general?
Well, so far the indictments have helped Donald Trump in the Republican primary and don't seem to have had an effect on his numbers in the general. There is, of course, the concern that if he is convicted before the election day, that could seriously harm his chances of winning. But that might not happen. It might not be a split screen, Kristen. It might just be the Hunter Biden trials going on next year, not the Trump trials.
All right, we'll have to watch and see how it all unfolds. Great conversation, guys. Thank you, Monica, Symone, and Matthew.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.